The problem with that airport is there is a fundamental lack of decent leadership. It's very unhappy, not just in ATC. There's lots of problems in all of the departments there. I know that there are events that have happened at that airport that simply do not happen at a safe or well-run airport. The passengers and crew of a commercial aircraft landing at Ronaldsway were actually put at pretty significant risk, and yet the pilot was never informed of that. There's certain key figures in management at that airport who are truly dreadful, and in my humble opinion, yes, they need to go. And the reality is that airport is a basket case.
We're talking to Sue Scott, who is a former air traffic controller at Ronaldsway Airport. Now, Sue, you've recently gone public with concerns you've had about the operation of air traffic control and Ronaldsway Airport in particular. What are your main concerns and why have you come forward with this information now?
I think what prompted me to call in on Friday was some of the answers that were being given by the Minister in Tynwald late last year in relation to the regulatory status of the airport and recruitment and, more importantly, retention of ATCOs there. And I felt that, and can I just be clear, I'm not blaming the Minister for this because she's only as good as the information she's given. And I felt on Friday as well, that she's been quite sadly misinformed about the real issues there. The reality is that airport is a basket case. It's very unhappy, not just in ATC. There's lots of problems in all of the departments there. There's lots of great people there.
Yeah. Well, if we can start then with one of the things the public have noticed, first of all, and you mentioned it there, was the training of ATCOs, air traffic control officers. Yeah. So let's deal with that first of all. The public, as far as they're concerned at the moment, they're seeing all these closures for the tea breaks. And the airport have been saying that that's because they haven't physically got enough people. Where do you think this problem has come from and when did it start to arise?
Well, to use the Minister's own words, that problem is multifaceted. There is absolutely a shortage of air traffic controllers globally. That's beyond doubt. However, the problems at Ronaldsway, it's not just about the recruitment and training of the controllers. It's also about retaining us once we're there and understanding, what makes somebody want to stay in a workplace and what doesn't. So yes, it's quite clear that they do not have enough controllers at the moment. They are under a lot of pressure. And actually, can I just talk about the tea breaks? The fatigue breaks, this is a European-wide regulation, and it's a good regulation because you do have to make sure that you're mentally alert at all times. And while I know, of course, Ronaldsway is not Heathrow, there are differences. It's like comparing apples with pears. And if you imagine at Heathrow, for instance, they're going to have, in the tower, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, minimum of 5 plus supervisor controllers at any one, all the time, backed up by the bank of assistants as well. So that's one controller for one runway, one controller for another runway, 3 ground controllers, and they're separating the task and they do it very well. So one person just dealing with one runway, more or less, that doesn't mean to say it's an easy job. They're working very, very hard. And then also on the radar side, you're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plus a bank suit. So again, so you're talking about 10 controllers at any one time to keep the operation moving. Now, sometimes at Ronaldsway, that's down to one person who's doing everything. The task is not split up. And while it's still not busy, you do have to stay alert. There's always something happening on the airport.
And everything has to be controlled from the tower, doesn't it? Things moving around. So it's not just, the 12:30 arrival from Manchester. There's all sorts of other things. Maybe you could just explain a bit about
So
some of these other things
when you're
that
working in
controllers
like the
have to do.
goldfish bowl bit at the top in the actual visual control tower, because there are two sections to the operation there. So we've got, just to keep this simple, we've got the radar room, which is down at the base of the tower, and we've got the visual control room, which is at the top of the tower. And you have to work in both of these positions, not at the same time, although at times when radar is not available or when staff are not available, they do have a provision where somebody working on what we call a procedural element of their license. A license is broken down into different disciplines, and it's important that you know which discipline you're working on at any one time. So if you're in the tower and there's no more staff, and you could be in the tower working effectively tower, visual control, clear land, clear takeoff, aircraft within the local area, also doing all ground movement control, and that includes talking to all of the vehicles. And this is safety critical also, because you need to make sure that, for instance, your landing surfaces, your runways are kept, I don't like to use the word sterile, but it's probably a good way of putting it, are kept safe at all times. And so you're dealing with that, but potentially when you're working in that configuration, when there's nobody else available, the guys are also dealing with aircraft approaching and departing before they are handed over to Scottish Centre or elsewhere. So that means you can't use radar. So you're having to keep a mental picture in your head of where aircraft are that you can't see, because they might be 20 or 30 miles away and at different levels, and you've got to keep those separated. And it's very tricky how you do that, especially when you can't use radar. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but if you get the idea.
Yes,
so a person up in the tower is doing all of that at the same time. And so they do need the break after the 2 hours. But I'd like to say something else about the breaks, because I do feel myself cringing whenever I hear people saying, and even in jest, tea breaks, because as in any work environment, it's not just the operational work that needs to happen. So there's an awful lot of extra work that goes on to keep an air traffic control unit working. You need to write procedures, you need to write rosters, you need to do safety investigations, risk assessments, all kinds of minutiae, important and some of it not so important but necessary.
Done, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the reality is you don't have many people to do it. So most controllers are also doing, picking up secondary tasks as well. And even though those breaks are supposed to be responsibility free, you'll find that most people they're actually very flexible. So when you're off, having a tea break, quite often you're doing other jobs, necessary jobs to keep the operation running.
And is that ideal, or
No,
should that not happen?
It shouldn't really happen. And I think that's one of the reasons that there's been a growing unrest within the tower, because an awful lot of the things that they were doing out of goodwill, extra tasks. I did it myself when I've worked hundreds of extra hours on investigations, etc. And so again, coming back to the recruitment, when we're recruiting ab initio students, basically people off the street, to go through the entire training, it can easily be 3 years from recruitment before they're actually holding an air traffic controller's license in their hand and not able to work on their own. That's how long it can take, and there is actually a quite high attrition rate. People do fail. So just because you've recruited, for instance, 4 students at ATCOs, or 4 people who will eventually become students ATCOs and then full ATCOs, air traffic control officers, I should clarify that, doesn't mean to say you're going to get 4 out at the other end. People do fail.
And in terms of some of the safety concerns that you had, I mean, you were quite forthright in some of the points you made. When you were talking to the Minister, you were talking about the safety status, the status of Ronaldsway Airport, where the Minister kept diverting it to talk about air traffic control. Are you saying there's 2 different statuses on Ronaldsway here?
Yes.
It's not just one. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could just explain that position.
So So, I mean, the concept of special attention and on notice is a common regulatory term across all industries. I think most people understand that once your organisation has been audited, if there's any significant findings, you might find that the relevant regulator is saying, we need to do something about this. And if it's serious enough, then they will place you into a specific status, which normally is time bound, and you have to do something about this. So I arrived here in November 2019, and I actually arrived on the very same week of the UK CAA audit, because we contract the UK CAA to do our audits, and then the Isle of Man CAA read the audits and talk to the UK CAA, and then they decide what regulatory status, if any, they're going to place.
Why is there a duplication? Why is the Isle of Man not just under the Civil Aviation Authority?
Okay, this is not a criticism of the Isle of Man CAA, but when you consider the UK CAA are regulating aviation across most of the British Isles, they have a huge number of people covering a huge number of specialisations. There's a lot of expertise there. And what you have at the Isle of Man is a very small number of people who could not possibly hold the number of competencies that you'd expect for full regulation. Now, I think what is very good is that we have the aircraft registry and the shipping registry, etc. That's good business for the island. And that's originally what the Isle of Man CAA, the Civil Aviation Administration, was. And I think about 16 years ago, I'm not sure how it came about, it's before my time. I think the decision was made between the UK CAA and the Isle of Man that if we're going to have a regulator, it should be a full regulator, so do your own thing. Now,
but it would appear that surely they're not fully resourced or indeed competent to be doing this.
I think there are questions to be asked about the role of the Isle of Man CAA. And again, this is not to cast aspersions on any particular individual. Everybody's well motivated. And the problem that we have at the moment is where you've got one regulator who theoretically is the what they call a competent authority for the islands, not just the airport. But they are having to contract another, one might argue, more competent, more experienced organisation to do a lot of their work, but that organisation is not able to actually make regulatory decisions. That's done by the Isle of Man CAA, and I think sometimes things can fall down.
But is there a danger then that the Isle of Man could effectively cherry pick which parts of a UK CAA report that they fancy implementing or not?
That is a danger. I'm not saying
do you know that's happened?
I don't know for certain that that's happened, no. I don't, and I don't think that would be the case, certainly not cherry picking, things like that. But what they can do is they can decide whether or not something is serious enough to take action on. So getting back to the regulatory status, now Michelle Hayward, Dr. Hayward, did confirm in Tynwald, I think it was last November, when she was asked what the regulatory status of the airport is. She confirmed at that point that the airport is in special attention. She also then said that that had been since May 2024, and prior to that it had been on notice from early 2022. And that's true, but it omitted the fact that actually before the status was escalated to on notice, they were already in special attention and had been since December 2019. And at that point, it was, I could explain exactly why, but I don't think your listeners really want to be bored with the ins and outs of the decision making. But basically, it was due to the lack of a documented safety management system. The airport, for some reason I still don't understand, were allowed to withdraw their safety management manual, which is what defines and encapsulates all of the policies, procedures, processes, etc., which demonstrate how you manage safety at your unit. So without that, you don't really have, a schematic to go to. That's not to say nobody's doing any safety work, but it's not coordinated. It's not assured. And normally, if you're going to replace a manual like that, you do just that. You have the new manual before you withdraw the old one. That didn't happen here.
And do you know whether that manual now exists?
It does. That's another funny story. So it took about, it was at least 18 months before they finally got a safety management manual written. And even then, it was fairly well acknowledged that it wasn't doing the job. It wasn't really satisfactory. And one of the, so there was, it did need to be rewritten, which that did happen, I don't know, 18 months ago, maybe, I don't know. Now, I think there are other safety issues that, and I don't know exactly which ones were the reason behind the safety, the special attention remaining in place, but it was put into special attention. That remained until early 2022, when that was escalated to on notice, mainly because almost the whole top tier, the key managers had gone for one reason or another, and then that was expanded to encapsulate other of the safety issues as well. And that was May 2024, that was lifted, on notice was lifted, and they just went straight back into special attention, which is still a degraded regulatory state. Where Dr. Hayward, I think, was getting a bit confused was by the separate allocation of the status of special attention just to the ATC unit. And that's new, that only lasted a few months. That was August last year, following an audit by the UK CAA, where it became clear that training had broken down for one reason or another, to such an extent that they could not get air traffic controllers trained. They were at breaking point in terms of having enough people to just keep the operation running. And as I understand it, that status has recently been lifted, but that was a short-term status specifically on ATC. What I was trying to talk to Dr. Hayward about was, what's the status of the airport? I suspect it is still in special attention, but I don't know for certain. It certainly was in November last year.
So what it appears then, possibly from the outside, that a lot of this is to do with documentation and other things, which, although important, people may say, well, that's the sort of the bureaucracy side of running an airport. Do you have any concerns of things that have actually gone wrong, that had real tangible sort of threats to safety?
I do, and just to...
And can you share any of those experiences?
I've got to be responsible with some of this stuff. I do, but it is important that people understand what's meant by safety. Now, talking about documentation and bureaucracy, you're absolutely right, but we're talking about documentation that that shows or guides the unit in how to run its activities safely. And thinking back to, I'm sure you're aware of the concept of an organisational accident. That's where I'm thinking of the King's Crosses, the Piper Alphas, Tenerife, etc., where a whole facet, and NASA is a big case in point, a whole bundle of organisational factors have come together at the wrong time.
And they've lined up,
exactly.
And it's happened.
So talking about paperwork, I mean, you go back to Piper Alpha, and I can't remember how many men died in Piper Alpha, but ultimately that came down to the wrong worksheet being in the wrong tray. You know, that was a major contributory factor to that disaster. So don't sort of underestimate the importance of making sure that your procedures are correct. But yeah, and there just doesn't seem to be any understanding of how to understand their safety performance, and part of that comes down to how they manage their safety investigations, for instance, because that's your knowledge. And you have to be careful with this because you don't want to scare the flying public, but they
still have a right to know.
They have a right to know a certain amount of what goes on. They have a right to be assured that their airport is safe. Now, that doesn't mean to say you have to share every single bit, but I know that there are events that have happened at that airport that simply do not happen at a safe or well-run airport. There is one event comes to mind that happened a couple of years ago now, where the passengers and crew of a commercial aircraft landing at Ronaldsway were actually put at pretty significant risk, and yet the pilot was never informed of that, so was robbed of the opportunity to make an informed decision. Now, if the fuller circumstances of that came out, I think there would be a few ructions, to be perfectly honest. And I'm not saying this with any joy at all. When I heard about this, I was so alarmed that I contacted the MHK who had responsibility for the airport at that time and voiced my concerns and said, I don't think this is getting the level of attention or priority that it should do. This is more serious than you might think. And I believe he then took that to the minister. And as I understand it, the response of the airport was not to worry too much about what had actually happened, but it was to point the finger of blame at me.
Shoot the messenger.
Yeah, I'm aware that one of the immediate actions in the wake of that event wasn't to get straight into their, talk to, there's a body called the Air Accident Investigations Branch, which this should have been reported to without fail. It was quite clearly came into the category of a serious incident. However, instead of actually finding out why that circumstance came about, because I'm not pointing the finger of blame at anybody who was involved in that, I would like to know why the people involved felt that they had to do what they did, and I think part of that is fear of retribution. However, the initial action was to have a high-level meeting and a risk assessment. Great, you might think. The risk assessment wasn't on the event. The risk assessment was on disgruntled ex-employees. They were more concerned about people knowing about this than about what had actually happened.
They were more concerned about you highlighting this.
Yes.
Now, am I right in thinking you highlighted it by going to those people responsible? You didn't go public or anything like that?
Exactly.
You went...
Before
you tried
Friday,
to do the proper channels?
Yeah, before Friday, I had never gone public about this. Despite all my misgivings, I've tried to be responsible from the get-go. I could tell within the first 2 weeks of being here that this was a badly managed airport in dire straits, really, when it comes to safety. And that's when I did actually blow the whistle as a result of that.
So what led you to actually leave the airport? And I know you've mentioned in your the radio phone-in, you said about a toxic culture and bullying and so forth. Now, you've obviously experienced this after you'd left, that they were more concerned about what you were saying than rather what it was you were saying.
Yes. I think there is a culture at senior management, and when I say senior management, I'm talking right up to chief officer level. And this is why, I do actually have sympathy with the political members and the ministers here as well, because I think they're being run rings round by the chief officers. I don't think, and I think Stu Peters actually alluded to that last year, also in Tynwald, about how they were basically kept in the dark about key decisions. And there's an argument to be had about whether they should or they shouldn't. But it does seem that a group of people there who, and this is where, talking about organisational failure, I wrote down a quote before to remind myself. So this is from a major investigation report. But when we think back to NASA with the Challenger and the Columbia disasters, and one of the main criticisms was that they failed to alter its essential safety culture in the 17 years between the two accidents. And they did not address the fundamental organisational and cultural problems which very much exist at Ronaldsway. And what I've found with senior management up there is they never question their own performance. It's always somebody else's fault. They're always looking for somebody to blame, rather than the just culture, the open safety culture, which any safety critical organisation needs to be able to ensure that it learns from its own mistakes, because mistakes will happen. In the best run organisations, mistakes will happen. But if you've got a good functioning safety management system and a good safety culture, a good just culture, then you can ensure that those events don't transpire into the awful conclusion that happened, for instance, at Tenerife or with NASA, Linata. There's so many, I mean, the history books are full. You have to learn the lessons from these things.
There may be some people who would just maybe say, okay, disgruntled ex-employee, you mentioned that before. What actually led you to resign and leave?
Okay, so people are people who raise safety concerns are dismissed. Safety concerns are swept to one side. The airport will tell you they're not, but they are, and I could explain all the different ways.
Do you think management are then trying to just paint you as and others who raise concerns as troublemakers?
Absolutely, yes. I know I've been smeared behind my back off island as well, because I've spoken to people who have spoken to certain senior managers here. I'm not going to mention names, and I know exactly what's been said about me, about how I'm a troublemaker and and I get things wrong. I don't. But
what do you actually have to gain from this?
Well, exactly, because this is the thing. I mean, I turned 60 last year. I came here at the age of 54 and expecting this. This was never meant to be a career move. I mean, I've had a very, very good career, which I'm quite proud of, actually. This was supposed to be, I thought, a quiet little slide into retirement role, go back to my roots, say clear land, clear takeoff for a few years, a relatively simple airport. That's not to say it's easy, by the way. Do that, and I'd plan to work maybe 10 years before I retire and stay here on the island. And that's why I didn't leave the island. I haven't had paid work in 3.5 years. I did not intend to have to start dipping into savings and pensions at the age of 57. We've had to be very careful because, that's the early years you dip in, the shorter the pot's going to last.
Did you ever sort of consider, well, the answer here is to just be quiet, sit back?
Unfortunately, that's not in my nature. I'm a creature of principle. That's not to say I'm any kind of a hero or anything like that, but I can't. I can't just, when I can see something so wrong, I can't just sit back and do nothing, which is why I blew the whistle in the first place, which is why for 3.5 years I jumped through every hoop I was asked to jump through by the DOI, by the CAA, and eventually I realised that that nothing was going to change.
But when you see how you've been treated, how concerned are you that others may well just sit tight and say nothing?
And that's why I'm talking now, because to be honest, at the moment, I think I'm just about the only person who can talk, because I'm not dependent upon a salary. I wish I was, but I'm not dependent upon a salary. I don't have to answer to anybody, and there's no NDA on me. Now, other people, even those that have left, they're still, in the middle of their careers. They've got to worry about what kind of reputation they get elsewhere if they make too much of a noise here. So there's an awful lot of people I know, because I'm talking to them, an awful lot of people who want to speak out, but they're scared. They're scared of retribution. I mentioned the 3 others that have left in the past, in the 3 years since I left. They've all left for similar reasons. After I left, 2 controllers were recruited, 2 experienced controllers were recruited. One of them left within, I don't know, 7 months, something like that. He validated his tower ticket and basically he'd had enough. And he made it quite clear why he was leaving when he left. He's now working over in the UK. None of us have gone, despite what people might think on social media, none of us left for a higher salary anywhere. The other one left, and he was, I don't think they'll realise how much of a loss to that airport he was. A very good friend of mine, he's also working elsewhere at another airport and doing very well. But the breadth of experience that he had there's a sad loss. And again, they left because of safety concerns and poor management. And anybody who does that is just swept aside. We've got another one at the moment. So when Michelle's standing up there and giving the ATCO numbers that we have at the moment, it's not actually the full story. So for instance, we have one at the moment who, even though he's on a high salary, hasn't been operational for, I think it's about a year now, and not because of his own volition, because he's been prevented from working. And this kind of thing is hidden. And I can't talk too much about that because I know he's taking action. But basically, we're going to lose him too. So, and he's very experienced.
At the time of us recording this interview, it's just been announced this morning that Michelle Haywood has actually been sacked from the position of Infrastructure Minister. So there is going to be a new minister. In fact, it's been announced that the new minister is Tim Crookall. When Minister Haywood said about those who have left, she said they'd all conducted exit interviews. What happened in your exit interview?
Oh, I was shuffled out the door as fast as you can say. The minute I stopped playing ball, I became persona non grata. My input.
Did you have an exit interview?
No, I wasn't even.
So you didn't even have an exit interview, but Michelle Haywood said that everybody had had exit interviews.
And this is what I meant when I thought she was misinformed. I don't blame her. She can only say what she's... I mean, she goes... She's not the expert, obviously. She can't be. So she then goes to, I don't know, officers within the DOI, wherever that might be, and say, did they all have exit interviews? Oh, yeah, they did. No, they didn't. Some of them did, and I know that I know for certain, at least... well, probably all three of the other ones, safety concerns were raised. So she said, they're listened to. Well, they might be listened to, but then I think the results go into file 13 once the exit interview is given. It's a case of, okay, get rid of them now. They were a troublemaker anyway. And it doesn't matter what the impact on the operation is. We're losing staff. And there's an awful lot of focus on recruitment and training, and these are really important issues, obviously. But if you don't focus on retaining the staff you've got, making it a working environment where people want to go to work, then you're flogging a dead horse from the outset. The problem with that airport is there is a fundamental lack of decent leadership. People, they don't really understand what the issues are. There is no real effort to bring the teams together at that airport, and that's what's needed, because you know what? There's some really, really good people there, and there's potential to have some really good teams there who work together for the sake. It should be a brilliant place to work. But I felt that I could no longer, in all good conscience, stay at an airport where I'd finally given up.
What do you think would have happened if you hadn't left of your own accord?
That's a difficult one. They were surprised when I left. They weren't expecting me to. I think they thought, because I would stay in my box and just put up with it. So I think it came as a bit of a surprise when I went, yeah, enough with this. But if I had stayed, I know I wouldn't have kept quiet. I can't, in all good conscience. And I think possibly there would have come a point where they'd have thought, I'm just not worth the aggro. Rather than resolve what's being raised, let's just get rid. Because I've seen that happening with others.
But you say about the culture from management there. Is there a real danger then that those who are on the front line, does that not signal that if something does go wrong, then they'll simply be the fall guy? Is that not the danger?
Yeah, now don't get me wrong. I mean, there's certain key figures in management at that airport who are truly dreadful. And in my humble opinion, yes, they need to go. However, there is a danger that if that happens, that one or the other is used as the fall guy, which is why Dr. Haywood being replaced by Mr. Crookall, who actually I've got hopes for, because I do know he does have some inkling of the issues there.
So what's your next step now? Are you obviously Michelle Haywood invited you to come and talk to us. She's now gone. Mr. Crookall's there. Are you going to be reaching out to him?
I think I might, if he's open to it. It's you know, that's up to him. There's so much to talk about. I mean, I feel like I've just skimmed the surface of some of the real issues. But you know, we would be here all day if I was to go into the nitty gritty and the detail of everything. My parting gift when I left was to write a 100 odd page report on my opinion of the safety organisation. Well, not just my opinion, my findings of the safety organisation at the airport, what I saw as the key risks and what I thought they should do about it. Now that's 3 years old now, and I can't just hand this out willy-nilly because that's sensitive, and I am quite responsible about these things despite what they might think. And that does come, although I am an air traffic controller, that is my trade. I have worked at a fairly senior level in safety management as well. When I worked for another major air navigation service provider, I don't want to start throwing names around. For a few years, I was manager of safety for the airports, the 16 airports where we provided air traffic services, and part of that role was also head of incident investigation for airports. So while I'm not the expert, I do have a fair amount of expertise. So my findings and the reports I've written and submitted over the years are from a position of knowledge and experience, and it's I don't know why I bothered. And that was why, you know, on Friday I thought, no, what the hey, I've got to call. After her last appearance on the Man in Line, I thought there's some fundamental misunderstandings here. Next time she's on, I'm going to have to call. And but I didn't follow it. And then somebody told me 2 days before, oh, Michelle Hayward's on. And I thought, oh, crumbs, I'm going to have to do this now, aren't I? I hadn't really expected the amount of attention it's generated.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much indeed for talking to us, and hopefully we'll see some resolve coming through, and who knows, we might talk to you again on this subject.
I'm very pleased to, thank you, and thanks for your time.